Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. I see lots of people in chat and people are still joining, so we'll probably just hang out for another minute or so while we get everyone settled in. But I have seen a ton of people saying hi in chat, more than I'm going to read through to say where everyone's from. But needless to say, we have people in chat from all over the world, which is fantastic to see. And today's webinar, we're going to be talking about advanced remote video production. So Dave and I are here to kind of guide you through, and later on we will be joined by a special guest and an expert in this field as well. And James will join us and address some questions and talk to us about StreamShark. Yeah, more people saying hi, which is great. So yeah, I still see the number ticking up here. So we're just going to wait a few more moments here. And I think we just have a poll posted now. We will have polls posted throughout today's webinar on various different topics. The one that has gone up now is asking the question, what sector, what industry are you part of? We asked this because it's curious, and especially for today's content, to be able to understand, what use case in particular people might have. And certainly that's valuable information for us, and will be valuable information that we will share with James from StreamShark, as well as it's valuable to his understanding of customers as well. So appreciate if you join in on that, weigh in on that poll. Let us know what sort of industry you work in, and how relevant today's topic might be. We'll be asking more of that stuff. Of course, you can ask questions in chat. Chat away as everyone is doing, saying hi. We also have a question and answer panel there in Crowdcast. So if you have a question for us, throw it in there, and we'll get to those. If it's really relevant to the part of the discussion that we're in, I may bring it up in the middle. Otherwise, we may hold many of them until the end of the presentation, and then we'll jump through a bunch of those questions. So feel free to put those in there. If you say it in chat and it looks like it's a great question, our moderators can elevate it into the Q&A panel so I can see it. You'll also notice that there is an upvote function in the Q&A panel. If you use that, it'll put what you guys are voting for as the most relevant up at the top, and that'll kind of help me prioritize what we should be answering. So feel free to use the upvote stuff. If you're familiar with Reddit, same kind of idea. Push it to the top. So that'll be great. All right. I do see people answering the question for the poll in the chat. Open up the poll window, and you should be able to answer it there. If you don't fit into one of the poll categories, that's fine. You can throw that into chat. But if you do fit one of those poll categories, use the poll function. That will help us get all those numbers together. So, all right. I think we're about ready to go here. I'm seeing our numbers stabilizing here. That's usually my indicator as to when to get started. So if everyone is ready, let's jump into today's topic, advanced remote video production. So we do have a bit of a slide conversation. So Dave, how are we doing?
We're doing good today. I think, like you said, we got lots of people tuning in, and we've got a great guest going to join us at the end that's really going to help us to wrap all this up. But we've been having a lot of conversations with end customers and our channel partners about how to do remote production. Obviously, with what's going on in the world today, everybody's trying to, get to that next level, and they've had to kind of accelerate some of their plans. So we've seen a drastic increase in interest in this topic. So let's go ahead and get to it.
So we're going to break this down into essentially 4 parts. The first one, really trying to cover some of the elements of the advanced remote video production and some of the tools you might need. And then specifically addressing how you might do it with the Epiphan Pearl products as a hardware encoder within this kind of production workflow. Third, we'll talk about distributing that content, and we'll invite James from StreamShark to join us at that point and get his point of view and be able to answer some of the questions. And then we'll kind of jump into the real Q&A after that. So let's jump into it. So the first one is talking about the elements of advanced remote video production. This is an interesting one to unpack a little bit, because there's a lot of ways to do this. But what we're really talking about and defining advanced, is trying to do pro AV from a distance.
Right.
So usually that means we're trying to go beyond the webcam, maybe a little bit beyond USB microphones, especially beyond mobile phones and tablets, where we really want to get into professional grade video, and very likely, especially given today's current situation, very likely not in the same room as your on-camera talent. And that's where things really get interesting from the production standpoint. So, if we're doing some content, then doing the webcam, the USB mics, as I'm doing at the moment, is fine. But if you want to take that extra step, that's really what we're talking about with advanced. So that setup, Dave, maybe you can guide us through a little bit of what one of those setups might look like from a toolkit perspective.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we want to get beyond the basic webcam, and mainly that's because we want that level of control. And there are cameras that can offer that level of control remotely. So if you step into the more kind of pro grade cameras, things like PTZ cameras or Z cams, they give you that ability to control everything, whether that's your depth of field by the aperture you choose, fixing your manual focus so that things aren't distracting. So it just allows you to get in there and control every element of what that camera is doing. So it's worthwhile. And we'll talk later about how do you control these things remotely, but having that level of control over your cameras is one of the things you want to first look at. Similarly, a video switcher is kind of an essential element unless you have just a one camera, one person kind of presentation that you're trying to give. So you really want to have, even if it is one person, you often want to have multiple cameras or multiple views of that person so that you can switch throughout the production and keep it interesting, right? So it's not just one camera angle through the entire 40-minute presentation or whatever you're doing. So you want to have a video switcher that's capable of bringing in either multiple camera views or multiple sources. Some will allow you to insert media and graphics and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot that can be done with a video switcher that can really add to the production. And again, all of these things we can do remotely, and we'll talk about how to do that a little later. Audio mixer is the same thing. So USB microphones and those kind of things are great for a quick setup, but if you want to have a little bit more control, especially if you're mixing levels from multiple people at multiple destinations, as we're doing today, you're going to want to come into a mixer and have that level of control. And then there are lights, obviously, that can be controlled as well. And DMX is a popular protocol for controlling lights. Both, certain lights can have adjust the level, turn them on and off. Also, if they're LED based, a lot of times you can change the color or the temperature of the light. So it gives you a lot of control over what the production looks like, allows you to match lighting with whatever natural lighting might be in the room that might change over time. So having that control throughout the production, or even at the very least right before the production to get everything ready, goes a long way to making sure that that you've got the right stuff. And as it says at the bottom of this slide, network is key here. If you're going to be controlling all of these elements remotely, you want to make sure that network is super solid, because the last thing you want is to be disconnected from all these devices that you're trying to control during your production. So you really do need to have a very robust network planned out nicely and tested well, and then you're on your way to being able to take control remotely of your production.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to talk about, upload speeds and things like that from purely a live streaming perspective. But if we're suddenly trying to do a whole bunch of other remote management, we're talking about the next level of that. We need to make sure we have overhead to support all these extra pieces, that maybe we need more advanced networking features like VPNs and so on. That's definitely a big one. We just put up a new poll there. That poll question is, have you ever produced video remotely? So weigh in on that one while we continue in there. So one of the things that usually we're kind of talking about, if we take that toolkit that Dave was just highlighting there, in terms of cameras, lighting, and other elements, what does that mean to do it remotely? Well, it usually means that instead of having a director and a producer and whoever's helping you to create this content sitting there in the room with you, they're sitting somewhere else. Right now, our video producer Cameron is sitting in his home. I'm sitting in my home. Dave's sitting in his home. James, who will join us later, is sitting in his home, literally on the other side of the world. And all of this is happening remotely, and that's kind of the current conditions we find ourselves in. And I think actually, even after everything goes back to normal, whatever that means, we're going to see a lot of this continue to happen where things don't have to be in the same place anymore. We're going to see a lot more remote production work. So what it means is that you might have your on-camera talent sitting there with all of that hardware, all that lighting, all the cameras, everything there, but they're not operating it themselves. Someone is doing it remotely for them, and that remote producer. And they'll be in two-way communication for not just the background protocols for all of those pieces of hardware, but also with the talent to make sure that they know what's going on, get cues and countdowns, all that basic stuff, but also just helping to move things along. Once we have that, of course, then usually it means we're then pushing that content out to a CDN or a platform to redistribute it. So this kind of creates an interesting circle because the remote producer can almost sit in the middle, but they're not actually moving the eventual stream data. They're kind of pulling the puppet strings at two different places, if you will, with that remote production space, and potentially at the platform CDN side, they may also be trying to moderate chat or things like that at the same time. So it almost creates a triangle in a way, but this is a good way to try to represent it. And again, the big advantage here is that that remote producer doesn't have to be the one hosting all of the equipment. They just need to participate in some of the control. So that may minimize how much they need on their side, but still needs to be pretty solid.
Yep.
So one of the ways that we can do this, and what we've been doing for this webinar and all of the webinars that we've been producing for the past 2 months, basically is involving a Pearl in a combination of different things, which we would not normally do, but it's just the current conditions put us in that situation where we have actually, all of our equipment for our stream and a lot of the extra production stuff sitting in our studio, which is sitting in our office. And then the rest of us, the talent, if you will, are joining all of that equipment remotely. In this case, we're using Zoom, but it really could be any video conferencing platform to do basically the same thing. But still, the anchor of all of this is our Pearl hardware encoder. And it basically allows us to roll in a bunch of these different tools that Dave was mentioning all into one. So for those of you who may not be aware, we wanted to kind of also touch on what is a Pearl. So the Pearl is, as I kind of mentioned, it's a standalone hardware encoder for live video production, streaming, recording, mixing, switching, kind of putting everything into one box that can be leveraged and used in many different ways. The idea is to essentially take the job of a switcher, a recorder, a streamer, a splitter, a scaler, and pack it all down into one small box that you can centrally manage. And in terms of a remote production, this can actually be a huge benefit because instead of trying to manage 5 different pieces of kit remotely, you're only managing one piece, and it's also particularly designed for remote management. And so that can really assist in terms of easing the workflow. So it gives you the versatility, also is built to be extremely reliable, easy to use, professional grade stuff that's going to work well in a remote scenario. And that's exactly what Cameron, our producer in the background, is doing, is he's remotely controlling the Pearl, and it's what's creating the final stream and content that you guys are seeing for this webinar. So this can be an extremely valuable tool. Now, while we might be joining together in using Zoom or another video conferencing, one of the advantages of a Pearl is that if we had a single person in that studio, we wouldn't have to have Zoom involved. They could just walk into the room and the remote producer could be running the show without having to be in the room. And I think that that is going to be what we start to see more and more going forward into the future, even after all of this COVID stuff has passed. We might see less of this, video conferencing, bridging, and stuff like that. But we'll definitely, I think, see a lot more unmanned studios with just talent walking in and doing it without having to have anyone sitting there in the control booth. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to tackle this topic is we're getting that question a lot. And I actually think it's something that a lot of people are looking to do going forward as they've identified the value of a video. And I think, the current situation with people being isolated has highlighted the value of video, especially to larger enterprises in a big way. So we did just put up another poll. If you want to weigh in on that, question is, which do you use for video production? A hardware encoder like a Pearl, or have you been using software encoders like an OBS or a Wirecast or a vMix? So one of the ways that we are remotely controlling the Pearl is through a system that's built into it, called AV Studio. AV Studio is a cloud service from Epiphan that has multiple components to it, but the main one we're focused on today allows us to remotely control a Pearl and at administrator level remotely in the cloud. And that can be extremely powerful for your remote producer. So what I'll do is I'll actually try to change my share here and try to bring up my other screen share wherever I put it. All right, give me a second.
No problem.
Where did I put that tab? Too many tabs, that's the problem. Too many tabs. Where did it go? Oh, that's why. Okay.
There we go. That looks familiar.
That's why. So, sorry about that. Google Slides really likes to take over and doesn't let you see some of the things that are in the tabs quite as much. So this is the AV Studio side. So as an Epiphan customer, you can sign up for AV Studio for free, and you can pair your Pearl hardware encoder to your AV Studio account. And in the list of devices, you would have however many of them you have paired to your account. I have a couple of them, a Pearl 2 and a Pearl Mini, that are sitting in my demo studio in the Ottawa office. And all I essentially have to do is click the remote login button, log in with the username and password, which in this box is still the default. I would definitely recommend setting a password, but this one's default since it's a shared system. And then I have access to the full administrator interface. And that means I can literally control any aspect of what this Pearl is doing. It can help me troubleshoot remotely. It can help me build multiple encoding channels. It can help me go through and build all of my different layouts for mixing and switching. So any of you who are not familiar with the Pearl, highly recommend you go and check out some of the previous webinars, including the one yesterday, which was a lengthy one, but it literally went through anything and everything you could ever want to know about a Pearl. So it's going to be a lot more detailed. But some of the things we can do here is creating our streaming. And streaming can just be RTMP push that we're sending to essentially any CDN platform that will ingest RTMP. So obviously, a lot of people will do this with things like YouTube or even Facebook, especially if the content they're trying to create is intended for social media or is intended for an easy to consume public audience. But those platforms aren't for everyone. And we'll kind of touch on that when we bring James in. Because obviously, if we're talking about a large enterprise, YouTube's probably not where they want to live and put their content. The good news is that, again, in terms of a Pearl, any platform that can ingest RTMP could be used as a destination for the Pearl. We can record at the same time on a Pearl in case something goes wrong and we need a backup. And as that message actually here even suggests, if someone wanted to integrate it within an enterprise class content management system like Kaltura Panopto, the Pearl can do that as well. So there's a lot of ways to leverage a hardware encoder like the Pearl for various different needs within your bigger video workflow. Again, one of the advantages with the Pearl is that in this case, the Pearl 2 can bring in as many as 6 video signals at one time in full HD and create as many as 6 simultaneous encoded outputs in full HD for maybe ISO recording, as well as program mixing and switching, maybe streaming in multiple frame sizes and bit rates and all this kind of stuff. So it's not a single encoder, it's a multi-encoder, which gives you a ton of flexibility to multitask between these different pieces. And so that's really an important factor for kind of today's topic that we're going to be discussing. So I'm going to just quickly take a look because I do see people have been asking some questions. So I'm just going to quickly glance and see if there's anything that I want to quickly address or hold until the end.
While you're doing that, we did post yet another poll of trying to see what up and coming streaming protocol you see yourself using most in future video production. So there are, a lot of changes coming and have been coming over the last little while in protocols in terms of streaming out. So we want to get your feedback, understand what protocols you think you're going to be needing most for your video productions.
Yeah, and so actually one of the questions, I don't know that we're going to necessarily answer this one right now today, but there was a question that was thrown in here just now saying any plans to use things like SRT and RIST over RTMP and so on. And that's actually one of the reasons why we have that poll question up there is that not only for us as a hardware company making hardware encoders, but also for James, who will join us later as a company that is a CDN, looking at these future protocols is important, and understanding what people intend on using or think they might use is important for us to understand where companies like ours need to go or maybe support in the future in terms of product planning. So that poll could be really important. Weigh in on that one. If you're not sure what some of those acronyms mean, and that's okay, or you're not familiar with some of the newer protocol technologies, that's okay. Obviously, you can Google them. I'm not saying to go and do that, but you can. But that's a bigger topic that's maybe a little bit more than we're going to tackle today. And I think we probably have some stuff coming up in the future on that. So stay tuned for future webinars talking about those things. So video content distribution. This is ultimately, kind of the next phase, right? Let's say we have a studio set up. We've chosen our cameras, we've chosen our lighting, we've chosen our audio setup. We know how we can remotely control all of those pieces and our encoder because it's a Pearl and it's awesome. But now we need to distribute that content. And that can be the biggest challenge in some cases because you're trying to reach your audience. And how you reach that audience, as I mentioned, it could be something as simple as social media platforms like YouTube or Facebook. And I think everyone's familiar with using social media for live content now, but it doesn't always fit what you're trying to do. And I saw someone in chat mention that they use Panopto and it integrates very nicely. I assume the Pearl does, which is true. But that's a great example where maybe your particular needs are to use a content management system like a Panopto or a Kaltura, or maybe you need a more customizable, more powerful, more flexible content delivery network, a CDN, like StreamShark, or maybe it's something in between social media and an enterprise CDN like a Vimeo can do. Or, obviously lots of enterprises use things like IBM Cloud Video or Wowza, or Microsoft Stream is really becoming extremely popular in larger enterprises because it integrates so well with their other toolkits like SharePoint and all the Teams and all these other things. But many big companies find that using something like StreamShark, which is a very flexible and very powerful CDN, kind of, I'd like to almost say almost a hybrid like a CMS, although James will probably correct me on some levels on that, but offering a lot of these toolkits in a really simple, easy to use way, where some of these others are kind of complicated or are too basic, like the social medias. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have James join us today, is because they've also done something extremely unique with the pearls to make that even easier without really making it uh, any any less desirable. It actually makes it better in all ways, I suppose. So one of the things that we can do here with StreamShark is, if you think back to that previous slide where we had, the remote producer and the remote production space, that's all still happening. Um, StreamShark as the CDN gives that remote producer some extra controls in the cloud at the CDN level in terms of simplifying some of the production setup. And we'll show you some screenshots of how that might work in a moment once we bring James in. But it adds an extra piece to the toolkit that can make this workflow even easier. And as I'm sure Cameron would mention after his experience last week helping out on an online event, if you can minimize how many tabs you have open on the things you're trying to manage, that's probably good. It'll make things easier, make things a lot less stressful, and streamline everything. So that's kind of the idea when you pair something like a Pearl with StreamShark as your CDN. So we'll bring James in now. So welcome, James.
Hi, George. Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Great.
to have you.
So James, maybe just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about StreamShark. Give us the elevator pitch, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is James Broberg. I'm the founder and CEO of StreamShark. And yeah, what does StreamShark do? I think you've touched on a lot of the points already, but I think we have some similar motto or aim where we want to combine and simplify a lot of complex functions that need to occur around the successful execution of a live streaming event. So in StreamShark, it's an end-to-end system. Nothing is anyone else's problem. That's really kind of a motto or an ethos that we all stick to in the company. So we work with a customer to ensure reliable contribution to our live event platform. I think we'll probably touch a bit more on the details on the how later on. But we are truly an end-to-end system. So we handle ingest, we handle transcode, we handle multi-CDN distribution, and the ultimate play out with the player to make sure that all different consumption devices and network conditions are catered for. And really, our system is designed around the whole live event workflow, much like the type of event we're having now. So we have the pre-event phase where you can get that persistent link out there to see demand and interest. We have the main event phase where we have the actual live content like we do now, and then the post-event phase where you might want to share an on-demand playback or have it long-lived in some form. And yeah, we ultimately wrap this up, as you touched on, George, in a viewer-facing CMS. So we have a viewer homepage where it's like a one-stop shop to consume the content. Then the content itself can be organized into channels, playlists, theming, so it's branded into our user or our customers' corporate branding and imaging and expectations. And then all of these pieces have very sophisticated access control on both the AV side from the operator's perspective and also the consumption side in terms of how you protect and gate access to that content.
Yeah, so this slide, this graphic, on the surface looks a little bit complicated, but it's actually fairly straightforward. So maybe walk us through a little bit of what we have here in terms of where StreamShark lives in this and how you can really make this experience easier and better for many people.
Yeah, I think the last 5 years for us are really a story of how we've kind of pushed further and further back into the premise of the customer in terms of working with them with the equipment that they have on hand to execute their live streams. So in this instance, we have customers that have simple single camera setups that are linked to, for instance, a Pearl encoder, or they may be a little bit more sophisticated, have a multicam setup where they're either switching on an ATEM or switching on the Pearl itself. And then we actually interface directly with the Pearl encoder in terms of acquiring that signal and having that come up as essentially a signal source inside the StreamShark platform. So after that point, StreamShark is their single control plane where they can, link StreamShark events to the Pearl. They can acquire the signal. They can start the stream. They can do a whole lot of sophisticated things that I guess we'll touch on a little bit later. And then ultimately that comes into our platform and we handle the rest. So that gives them peace of mind that, the ingest is reliable, transcoding is occurring to hit all those different quality levels that the end users need to make sure that playback is smooth. And then that plays out on our custom unbranded player that they can brand up how they like. And then we reach all those different platforms where end users are. So they might be consuming on the web through a browser. They might be consuming on a mobile device. Increasingly, we're doing a lot of VR and 360-based delivery. And then, of course, we also can syndicate out to social as well.
Yeah, so that's an important thing I think to note is that, what the platform that you guys have is extremely flexible in the sense that, many customers, and we have some fairly large, big shared customers that, are going to use it for their internal use, but you could just use it to restream as well at a basic level, or optionally when you need to do that, maybe big public announcement for a product launch, you might use the social platforms, but day to day, you're sharing or streaming content that's really intended for an internal use. So maybe let's talk about a little bit, as much as we can, about some of the shared customers that use the Pearl with StreamShark and how exactly they're using it and the benefits they're seeing.
Sure. Yeah, so we definitely have a real specialty around corporate or enterprise events and corporate communication. So they're using it to communicate, at scale inside an organization where some of these organizations have thousands or tens of thousands of employees. So scale is even a challenge even for the internal use case. And we're helping them reach their employees, whether they're in different remote offices or in this current situation or working from home. And we make sure that, the CEOs can get on there and they can address their employee base. They can run an all hands, they can communicate culture and strategy for their employees and help make sure that they're receiving that message in a really high quality fashion. So yeah, we are often referred to as a bit of a white labeled YouTube. So we definitely have the workflows to handle that use case fantastically, where the content is delivered securely to these employees. It's protected by integrating with their identity systems, the single sign-on systems and so on. And access is audited and very tightly regulated. But of course, if they want to make a public announcement, they may want to go to social, and we offer those tools as well. So it's really a one-stop shop for those types of customers where they can both, with confidence run these internal events, but also run these big public live announcements and use our deep API integrations with these social platforms to reach those audience. And the customers, those mutual customers that we spoke to are, from really diverse industries. So, big social networks, e-commerce platforms, new media platforms, security companies, research companies, and so on. So really diverse and interesting range of customers.
Yeah, and they all need something a little bit unique. Some are, some of the VOD functionality that you guys offer is, an extra piece that some of them really need, especially if they're maybe using it for user experience studies or things along those lines where, they need more than they're going to get out of a very basic social media style stream. They need extra tools in there that are going to help them along that process. And again, that's something that's, important to kind of think about in terms of maybe an emergent thing we've seen over the past couple of years with live streaming is that, especially with high tech companies, moving from a literal user experience lab located in a single place and they'll get a whole bunch of people in the room, moving it to a much more virtual where maybe that user experience lab is mobile, and they need to still get those streams somewhere where however many globally distributed people participating in the study can watch it. And that's something we've seen huge growth with in the past couple of years. The Pearl's been very popular in that space, and StreamShark as a platform has been popular in that space as well. So that really helps, I think, for the larger companies that are looking to do that type of use case and content, to really use the two together.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen, we've seen big changes, and we've tried to pivot to meet this changed condition that we're all working under. Because you know, a big part of what we've done, which is still relevant, but it's just being used in new and interesting ways, is integrating with Pearls in event spaces. So these might be event spaces for the town hall events or the Q&A events, or these might be those lab spaces that you spoke about, where these are fixed lab locations that are distributed across the world where user research studies can occur. So right now, like, not many people are in those labs and those spaces. So both ourselves and the customers are having to think of kind of creative ways to leverage their investment and their infrastructure, but still run these events and still run these user research studies. And I think, you know, the Pearl is ticking a lot of boxes on that front.
So what have you seen with people trying to adapt under the new conditions with some of those customers?
Yeah, we've seen a few things. A lot of them are still using their Pearl as a remote production facility, but they're kind of having to get creative about how the signal is routed and piped in there. So we've certainly seen customers sort of using it as a bit of a bridge to bridge their video conferencing systems with, you know, this large group of employees that want to watch it, the content from home in a secure fashion. So we're seeing them, for instance, link their Pearls with like a Google Meet endpoint or a BlueJeans endpoint, and then, you know, have the interactive piece much like we're doing now through a video conferencing system, but, you know, handling the scale piece with the Pearl and with StreamShark to stream it to our CDN, to have it played out through their SSO protected player that's hosted by StreamShark. And then, you know, you've got the best of both worlds. The people that need interactivity can have that interactivity, but, you know, where people just need to passively consume it and be confident that it's going to be a reliable stream and they're going to get that message, that's where they use StreamShark, our player, and our CDN infrastructure to do that. And also, in the instance of those research labs, we've had some really interesting conversations with our mutual customers around actually just, you know, helping level up, you know, their researchers' environment at home by literally just sending home Pearl Minis.
Right.
And we'll touch on that, with our new integration, that's going to be even more powerful, where, you know, these devices can go home to employees, but you can track and manage those assets and even control those assets through a central location.
Yeah, we've heard similar things from some of our customers in the education space who do use integrations like a Panopto or a Kaltura for their lecture capture needs. And they'll send a Pearl Mini to the professor's home so that he could do classes remotely. And essentially the integration that StreamShark has kind of worked with our API and has here does a very similar thing. And so I have a slide showing the setup page for that. Essentially, you know, once you define some of these pieces, it's going to stay that way. And if you ship it somewhere else, you plug it in, it's just going to reconnect. And so that gives you a lot of power without the user having to be that sophisticated. So maybe walk us through some of the pieces here that we use. And some of this is obviously there for security, but yeah, we kind of have this settings page.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a one-time step where you can onboard your Pearl 2, or your Pearl Mini to the StreamShark system. So we have a part of our product called the encoder management system, and it's a multi-vendor system, but we have, you know, probably have the most sophisticated support and integration for the Pearl devices. So essentially, you onboard your Pearl once. And this is, you know, the addition of actually having these controls on the Pearl is really new, and we're super excited about that, because previously it was quite cumbersome. You had to run it like a virtual machine or a container to act as a proxy or a bridge between the Pearl itself and the API of the Pearl and StreamShark. So now it's actually here on the device. This is huge for us, and it's huge for our customers. So we're super pleased about that. So really, this is just a matter of sort of adding some identifying information on the Pearl that's basically going to tell it how to phone home back to StreamShark and make it appear in the StreamShark encoder management system. So you just grab a couple of credentials from your account details inside of StreamShark, API, username, secret key, and basically give your encoder a name to help you identify it, and you're away. And then that can be onboarded onto the system. So that sort of handles the basic things in terms of, you know, that linkage. It can come up anywhere in the world with an internet connection, and that's going to start phoning home and pop up and give you a nice green tick on on the global view of all your encoders across the world. And then after that, you can certainly create StreamShark events, dynamically link them to channels on the Pearl, start them and stop them, set the quality. But then we have another level of sophistication in terms of the integration where we can actually pull the layouts from the Pearl using the API and using the integration and basically have them dynamically come up as selectable options for you when you're starting your live session. So you can pick your preferred shot out of all the layouts that exist on the Pearl, and we sort of consider the Pearl as the source of truth, where you can still use that Pearl UI to set up the layouts ahead of time. If those layouts change, we'll pick them up as well, and then you can kick off your event with your preferred layout. And you can actually even switch layouts during the event as well.
Yeah, and I think this is really where, you know, that simplifying and streamlining the remote production comes into play. And, you know, the comment I made earlier, trying to minimize how many tabs you might have open, like I was struggling to find earlier, you know, really helps. And if it's something where, you know, let's say it's one of those customers who is doing a user experience lab scenario, chances are a lot of those scenes, a lot of those shots are layouts are not changing very often. And so you're just really picking from what you need for that given study or application that day. So, you know, having this all kind of in one place really helps streamline that. And one of the things I've always loved about StreamShark in general, compared to many of the other CDNs that I've encountered, is the simplicity of the user experience that you guys have created. It's very clear, it's very understandable. I've used even some other very basic restreaming platforms. They're quite frankly a pain to navigate. Everything's hidden, everything's hard to find. So, you know, that can be extremely frustrating. So, you know, one of the great things that I find about StreamShark is, yeah, and this is an honest opinion, is that it's just so easy to understand the UI and to get through the different parts of it to create something very, very easy. And that's a wonderful thing that I don't often run across. I mean, even YouTube changes their UI all the time to mess it up and make it more complicated, right? So it's something where simplicity can really be a great thing.
Yeah.
That's very kind of you to say, George. Thank you.
I would say there's no other you know, partner that we have that's gone to the same extent that StreamShark has done with this integration to bring in these layouts dynamically. So if I do go in and reconfigure my Pearl and I change my layout or I add a new one, the next time I connect to StreamShark, you're going to see that and you're going to be able to choose from it. So it really, you know, completely separates the administration of the Pearl from the operation of the Pearl, which is exactly what you want. You don't want to be in the midst of a large administration UI while you're trying to operate it and while you're trying to, you know, worry about the CDN side and all of that going on. You guys have really drawn the line in a really nice place to say, here's the stuff that needs to be in StreamShark and people need on the fly. And then here's the stuff that you want to do beforehand. It's all set up and administration of the box. And so I think you've done a really great job of finding that fine line between what needs to be controlled in StreamShark and what doesn't. And I think it's obvious you guys are working very closely with end customers to understand how they're using the products together, and it just shows in the UI. So it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that's really the key, David, is talking directly to the customers. And, you know, our customers talk directly to our engineers. So they're really, there's a lot of two-way communications there around requirements. And I think especially, you know, for instance, that user research study, like a researcher is not an AV expert necessarily. So we just want to give them the minimum set of tools and controls that helps them get in there and do their job. Yeah.
And then, of course, as you touched on earlier, James, the scale of it as well. You know, this is a screenshot of showing a whole bunch of Pearls that are being managed, you know, through StreamShark. So the scalability there is really, you know, up to the customer as they grow. Hopefully their fleet and needs grow, and being able to start and stop these systems and bring them into whatever events they're creating makes it very easy and simple and straightforward. And that's really kind of coming back to the main topic of, you know, remote video production at an advanced level. That's really what it's all about ultimately, is, you know, making sure that you have the right pieces in the right places to make it easy to use. Anything that isn't easy to use, and I think this is probably something we can all agree on is true in the world in general. If it's not easy to use, people won't use it. And that's important.
Yeah, or they'll stumble using it, which is also very important in a live production, right? So you do want to make sure that it's very logically laid out. It's easy to follow, because there can be, especially for a producer, many distractions going on, and they need to have something very simple that's elegant, like you said, not too many tabs open, not too many things to distract them, so they can focus and make sure that things are rolling along the way they need to.
Yeah, and I think the other key thing is, in terms of simplification, much like AV Studio, this works behind the firewall, and I think that's a really critical thing, because you can be in all kinds of weird and wonderful event spaces, or on premise, or in a hotel, or going out there to stream something in the field, like an important announcement around this current health crisis, which is actually something one of our customers is deeply involved in. And it needs to come up, and as long as it has an internet connection, it needs to work. They don't need to be troubleshooting complicated router or firewall issues to try and get the thing working.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I actually just wanted to highlight something that, hilariously enough, I don't think any of our viewers noticed, but it actually highlights how great remote production can actually be when you do it the way we have it set up right now. Our producer, Cameron, his entire internet went down. We lost him for the past 10 minutes or so. And yet none of our viewers knew, other than it looked like he was getting sleepy and not doing enough switching, simply because where our Pearl lives and where this Zoom call to get it into the Pearl is being hosted has a far more reliable connection than he has in his home. And that's an important thing. It's great to do things from home, but let's be honest, home-based internet is not business grade internet, and it's going to be more prone to going down. It's going to have lower bandwidth oftentimes. So one of the reasons why I don't have the Pearl in my home to do this, and the Pearl is sitting in our studio in the office, is because it has a much stronger backbone and network and internet connection than any of us would have in our homes. And because of that, the actual stream and the actual webinar really wasn't impacted by Cameron losing all connectivity for a short time. So that's one of the things I think that kind of goes back to what we were looking at, of making sure you have a robust network, things are placed where they need to be placed, and that your remote producer isn't really the backbone. They're just one of the actors in the background. And so that if they do drop out temporarily, you can recover fairly easily. So we are going to jump into some questions, and there are quite a few here. So we're going to try and go through these, and I will try to, as I feel which ones are relevant to each of you, I will address them to you. One of the first ones coming from Janos, actually, a longtime friend of Epiphan. So I'm going to start with that one, Dave, and maybe, I guess it's maybe for both of us, but Jan's question is, could you explain the I/O setup? How are we getting the videos from our homes into the Pearl? That's a fairly basic one. Essentially, there's a computer sitting next to the Pearl in our studio office that's hosting this Zoom call, and we're joining that Zoom call. Then we're leveraging the Pearl's production tools of cropping, mixing, and switching to generate the live stream and stream it out to the platform. In this case, we're using Crowdcast for our webinars, but it could be StreamShark, it could be wherever, streaming out from the Pearl from there. Yep. The big advantage there is you could do this purely in software like Zoom Webinar, and we did experiment with that. We found the quality would be terrible, and visually it wasn't appealing because you couldn't brand it, you couldn't play with the cropping and the mixing and the switching in a way to make the content more appealing for the viewers. So for viewer experience, we've created this mix, and as James mentioned earlier, a lot of people are doing this in order to bridge the conferencing and streaming world right now. So the I/O on the Pearl is basically just an HDMI input from a computer running Zoom, which sounds overly simplistic, but when things get back to normal, we don't actually have to change anything. I can just walk into that studio and switch on the cameras, and I can do the exact same thing in that studio without changing any gear. So it's extremely flexible in the way we're doing that. a follow-up, John had asked this earlier, but I think it's basically the same question. Is this one Zoom call or many Zoom meetings? It's one Zoom call between myself, Dave, James, and Cameron, our producer, and then essentially an account that's feeding video to our Pearl encoder. So it's basically one Zoom call feeding Pearl, and Pearl's feeding the live stream out to you guys. Let's see. Question here from David Bailey. How is the latency from different sources in the remote producer handled? That's a tricky one. Maybe I guess I could have looked at that one in a few different ways. So maybe I'll put that to you two to see. I guess, well, James, we'll start with you actually. With a lot of the customers using StreamShark that are essentially doing these remote productions, how are they adapting to any of that latency, or what sort of latency are we talking about with the integration to a Pearl from StreamShark?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I touched on during our earlier chat, where there's interactivity needed, that's typically handled through the whatever video conferencing setup that they have, whether it's Meet or Zoom. So I can see, for instance, we're talking in real time now. I can see the producer view, sort of what's getting fed out is maybe a shade behind, a couple of seconds, a second or two. And then obviously, if it's going to go out to a streaming platform, there's going to be additional delays there too. So if people are consuming that content, through a web player, through HLS or Dash, the delay could be anywhere between 10 to 30 seconds. And if it's going out to social, it depends on the platform as well. It does vary quite a lot between different social platforms, because as always, when you're streaming at scale, there's a real trade-off between latency and reliability in terms of how each of those platforms are tuned. But not to get too off track, obviously everyone's excited about HLS and web-based low latency delivery, and that's not far around the corner, thankfully. So we can all look forward to a closer experience to the interactive piece that we're having now.
Yeah, David, I think the question asker, David Bailey, I think the main thing to your question there is that whenever you're doing remote production, you still have to have some sort of real-time back-channel communication, and so that your talent is more in sync and not relying on viewing the end stream as a confidence monitor, because that's not going to be effective in pretty much any live streaming scenario. As James was just saying, that could be 35, 40 seconds, a minute behind. So even if we were doing this a little bit differently, we would still probably want some sort of real-time back channel between all of us to make sure that the queuing and everything else makes sense. And the producer's role, from Cameron's perspective as the producer, he's also in the call listening to what we're saying, and because he's listening to that real-time communication, he can make the decisions of switching the different layouts between what you're seeing and throwing titles up on the screen. Even if it's delayed to what you guys see, it to him it's real time. So there really isn't much there. And if there is, it's so negligible it doesn't really impact things too negatively. Let's see. This is an interesting question from Robert that I think I'm going to pose to you, Dave, which is any idea when encoders will be able to pass closed captioning? And maybe, James, you can chime in on this afterwards and from a CDN point of view.
We've had a couple people inquiring about this, especially since we recently announced our LiveScript product, which does captioning, live real-time captioning. And one of the big questions was, how can I get that into my stream immediately? So that when I am sending this stream out, that can be included. And I think today we can do that immediately as a lower third, but we've also had people say, hey, I want that embedded in my stream. So if we're sending RTMP, say, to StreamShark, embed that as metadata along with the stream, so that either it can continue all the way to the end user, who then in a player option can decide whether they want to see the captions or they don't, or those captions can be processed at the StreamShark or the CDN side, because there may be other elements that need to get mixed into the stream as well there. So In some cases, people are happy to just kind of print them right on the screen at the source and say, that's what I want going out to my stream. But we do have users asking us, hey, can I bed that in the metadata? Can I get that so it's an option for the end viewer? And James, maybe, I don't know if that's something on your roadmap. It's certainly on ours to try to solve those kind of, tunneling that information back to the CDN side.
Yeah, this is certainly a big deal for our enterprise customers. We're seeing increasingly for the really important events that they're bringing in live captioners to do the captioning of the event. And it's been a really interesting experience to see this happen over the last few years and see the different sort of aptitudes and quality levels of some of these live captioners. Like some of them are just amazing, like astonishingly good. And I think there's a real art to that. But specifically to this question, we do support captions if they're sent to us. So if they're embedded in the RTMP or RTMPS stream in the standard formats, which is like 608 or 708,
yep.
Our player will have a closed caption button where you can turn on those captions or turn them off as you require. And I think increasingly on the on-demand side as well, that's an area of focus for us. We do have some customers testing an early release of our AI-based captioning solution, which is just for VOD at this point, which we're really excited about, which I think is going to unlock a lot of the potential of the content that's being generated, because it really makes, where this content is long-lived, it's just a whole lot of rich metadata that you have now about the content of the stream that you didn't necessarily have when it was stuck in an MP4 container or a HLS stream. So I think, in terms of indexability, searchability, if I want to find out that something that was said 12 months ago in a meeting, that just gives me a powerful framework to actually achieve that.
Yeah. So another question here coming in from Chris Colvin. I basically already answered this, Chris, but I'll address it here as well because people upvoted it quite a lot. Are you cropping out sections of a single zoom window for your images here? Yes, that's an easy one. Essentially, yes. We're leveraging the Pearl ability to do that cropping, and of course branding with images as a background and stuff like that. The Cameron, our producer, has kind of just quickly thrown those together to kind of make sure we have a 3 up like we have right now, or with the slides or whatever it is. That's easy to do, again, with some of those basic tools that are built into a Pearl. And then of course, if we were feeding StreamShark from that Pearl, those layouts would be there in the Pearl and the StreamShark UI that we looked at earlier to switch there if you wanted to. So it can be very powerful. Let's see. There was a question somewhat related to that, so I'm going to skip one of the questions and address this one from Richard saying, is the producer controlling the PowerPoint slides, or is that being lifted from the Zoom call? It's coming from the Zoom call. I'm controlling the slides in the Zoom call. So I'm sharing them into Zoom, and then again, we're just cropping out, which is actually probably a good thing because I use an ultra wide monitor at home. And so if I was just straight up sharing my Zoom screen share, you would have giant black bars down the side because the aspect ratio mismatch. But because we can play with that cropping in Pearl, it means you guys don't see that. Whereas if I tried to do this, Crowdcast, the platform we've been using for our webinars, has a WebRTC method to do a webcam and just a screen share. But if I was doing that there's no control. You would just see the giant, 21:9 aspect, and it wouldn't look good for the viewers because it wouldn't match their viewing experience aspect ratio. So that's another advantage of using something like Pearl and the abilities it has for cropping and scaling to make sure that gets cleaned up and is just a better experience on delivery.
And the way we have Pearl set up in the studio gives us the option to do either. So we can have George or myself or James share slides through the Zoom, or Cameron could be, taking a canned deck or additional slides and fitting those into the production as well. So we really have the option of doing both. And I know if it's slides that we're presenting, it's often really nice for the presenter themselves to be able to control when those slides advance and when they don't. And so that's often why we prefer to do it the way we've done it today. But it's certainly possible for Cameron to inject slides or other content directly, and that's what we're doing with the titling and other things. But he could certainly have hosted the slides on his side if we wanted to.
Yeah, and you'll notice now that Cameron's decided to flex his muscles. I guess coming back from his internet outage, he's decided that he has time to activate the live script in our studio and overlay that as a lower third. So what you guys are seeing right now was not intended for this webinar, but is a cool, fun thing to do. So those of you who aren't familiar with LiveScript yet, go back in our webinar catalog a couple of weeks. You'll see a webinar we did all about AI transcription. And one of the things, we can take a video signal from that transcription box and throw it into Pearl just like any other video signal. Again, leverage cropping, even key out the background if you wanted to, overlay it on top, and there we have an AI real-time transcription running over top of our video. So it can be that easy. So coming back to the questions here, Chris Colvin also asked, how can a remote user control a slide advance on a PowerPoint if the PC is running it beside the Pearl to ensure the best quality images? Remote desktop isn't always very good. Yeah, I mean, Chris, that's a question of where you want to have those pieces placed. In our experience, having one of the presenters, in this case myself, in control of the slides and sharing that in something like Zoom, and then having the encoder take the total Zoom output and cropping it. And of course, you can change between, gallery view and things like that. That tends to be a good way to do it. Another way you could do it is many of the conferencing tools like Zoom do allow people remote access to the presentation or the remote machine even, if you want. Again, it's a personal preference thing. I personally like having, whoever the presenter is in control of their own slides, ideally, just because that's better for pacing, and it skips the, queuing of next slide, please, asking a producer for it, because that's just not, I don't know. I find it clumsy. I don't like it. So having the presenter in charge of their own slides is a big advantage. That what you're outlining can definitely be a challenge. And in terms of quality of remote desktop, yeah, I mean, they vary all over the place. The Zoom one built in is actually not that bad. Personally, I've used Chrome remote desktop that I find is pretty decent. But yeah, there's lots of options there. Okay, there are a ton of questions here, so I'm going to try to get through some of these a little quicker. Let's see. Casey was asking, what are effective ways to achieve user-generated content from users of your product? I'm going to be honest, I don't totally understand that question, Casey. Maybe you can reiterate in chat what you mean by that, because I'm not sure exactly what you mean without more context. Jim asked, the reliable capture site connection component is a concern for my application. Does Epiphan have a solution to bond multiple network connections to help ensure steady upload regardless of location? We don't. Epiphan doesn't. We're just making the hardware encoder component to it, but there are definitely lots of network bonding solutions out there on the market. More and more, we're seeing those network bonding solutions be based around cellular LTE signals. They're not cheap, but they exist. I know we have customers in the UK who have used the Peplink multi-SIM card little routers that do bonding across multiple cell signals and can include a wired WAN to a hardline. Those are not cheap, and of course you're paying for multiple data plans. Ideally, you have multiple carrier signal SIM cards and things like that. But there's tons of networking gear out there that can do it. But certainly it's not necessarily an entry-level thing. It gets pricey pretty quickly. But absolutely, if that's a concern, yeah, there's not really many other ways to solve it beyond that. Let's see. So Richard was asking for clarification here. Are you guys just seeing the Zoom call, which can then be switched out, or are you getting the program out feed to you as Cameron's video? Not sure I totally understand the way you frame that question, but in the Zoom call, one of the participants in the Zoom call is a program feed that's the same thing you guys are seeing in the stream. It's essentially a loopback from the Pearl back into Zoom, so we have a confidence monitor. But we're also seeing each other in gallery view in Zoom. So it's both.
Yeah.
George, can I expand on that answer a
Yeah,
little
sure.
bit, just for the I
Yeah,
forgot who asked the question, but so what we're doing on the Pearl is we actually have two HDMI outs. So one is acting as a clean HDMI out that's feeding directly into Zoom. So that doesn't have any of the additional stuff on it that that James, Dave, and George are seeing locally. Locally on their Zoom call, they're seeing the confidence monitor, and we've piped in a little bit of extra data. So we have a clock on there that gives the time, that helps us test out our latency between the two. And we also have our audio meters bouncing up down in the top left corner. Stuff that you wouldn't want to see on the Zoom call because it doesn't make any sense for that. And that also gives us a little bit of added control so that we can make sure we're piping in, maybe some specific information. I can also send a visual message via Zoom on that confidence monitor, just using the Pearl layouts if I need to send a message and it's not getting through on our back channel chat. But yeah, hopefully that clarifies that.
Yeah.
And the machine is in the studio that George has talked about before, and that's a whole other Zoom session. So as you saw earlier, when my connection went down, had I been hosting it, the Zoom call as well, then this whole webinar would have been kaput.
Yeah. So there's a few different things happening, layers and loopbacks and all kinds of things. Sometimes it's difficult to get your head around that stuff, and that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges people are encountering at the moment in the current conditions, is how to navigate all these different pieces. Honestly, I think the main thing is there is no one way to do it. It really comes out of a little bit of experimentation and creativity to decide what's going to fit your particular workflow the best. We have the advantage that we have Cameron there in the background doing a lot of the production stuff. Last week, when we were helping out with an online live event, there was also someone operating as director in addition to Cameron as producer, because we were trying to synchronize panel guests and all kinds of things and needed that extra layer of coordination. And as someone who participated in one of those panels, that actually helped a lot to just keep things running smoothly, and unloaded Cameron from that director job as well. So I think part of that depends what's the scale of what you're trying to accomplish, and that creates how many layers you might need. Timmy was asking if we can see the interface of what it looks like for the remote producer. So there's a couple of ways we can do that. The StreamShark one we showed as an image in my slides earlier here. When you have a Pearl fully integrated with StreamShark, as James was talking to us about earlier, then you can have this workflow switcher that's pulling data from the Pearl, and is going to show you layouts. It's going to show you previews and all those different pieces. So Cameron, if we bring up that slide share again, just to show that, that's one of the UIs that you could use if you're using StreamShark. If you're trying to do it in just a Pearl, then it's going to look a little bit different. And what I'll do is I will try to pull this up here again. If I was doing it purely on a Pearl, then I can use the full admin interface to look at my layouts where I could build them and switch between them. Or I could even use Epiphan Live, which is more of an operator-oriented dashboard that is going to give me a little more visual representation, and a little more live video. This is hosted directly from a Pearl, and I am accessing this remotely through AV Studio. It's definitely more bandwidth intensive than doing the admin, but it's possible to do it, including with the switcher, where I can get thumbnails of all the different layouts I have built, and I can switch between them when I'm ready to go live with them, and so on. So this is a different Pearl from the one we're using to run the webinar. This is sitting in our other studio in our office that I use for demonstration purposes. So that's why it looks a little differently and kind of has somewhat of random things. But again, you can get creative with how you play with this. You can see we even played with chroma keying in this example and stuff like that. So to me, it depends on which interface and what platform you're using. If you're using StreamShark, then using the direct integration can really kind of minimize how many pieces you might have in play. If you're doing it to another platform, then you can definitely do it on the Pearl directly through AV Studio, and it will look and feel exactly like you would if you were sitting on the local network with your Pearl. You're controlling the Pearl directly. So
one of the
I
nice
hope that
features I
answers it.
think StreamShark adds in that example also, and James, maybe you can describe the kind of pre-show and post-show stage that you guys have, because I think really what George was talking about there was all, in the live event, you might be doing some switching and things, but you guys have a whole workflow that involves the pre and post kind of production side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely tailored to that live production workflow that we're all familiar with. So, typically you're getting asked to share the link out ahead of time. So you can create the event in StreamShark. It would default to be in the pre-state, but that link won't change. So that's one of the really nice things about that. And the content it can be dynamically changed. So that could be a splash screen saying, hey, the event is starting at this time, and this is the content. It could be a looping VOD. That might just be a sizzle reel that's kind of pumping you up for the event or something else. And then that life cycle can be controlled by the operator in StreamShark to move it to the main event. Like we have a confidence monitoring interface where you can see the live feed coming in, but the end user can't see that. So you're in full control. You get the confidence that everything's looking how it should look, and you can transition into the actual live event when it's ready to go. And then the viewers that are watching on the other end will cut over at the appropriate time.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a nice workflow. It really simplifies how many things you need to worry about and keeps your audience getting their pre-roll stuff while you're focused on getting the real production ready to go live, which is awesome.
Yeah. So coming back to some of the questions, Michael Dillon asked, so when doing picture-in-picture in webcam feeds, from a mirrored PC, again, in a Zoom call, a lot of people asking about basically the setup we're using today. Does the grid rearrange if people drop out, things like that? Tom also asked in chat, if someone joins the Zoom call, does it move everything around and mess up your cropping? The answer is yes, it can. But again, it's once you discover the best way to do this, get everyone on the call, get certain people to turn off their cameras to arrange the grid view the way you need it, so that the people, like myself, Dave, and James are the first three people in the Zoom call, essentially, so that if Cameron drops out like he did, when he rejoined, it didn't mess us up because we were the first three people in the call. I hope that makes sense. It's just a question of process, making sure that when you're getting set up and you're in your green room phase, if you will, make sure that people are turning on and off their cameras to get them lined up in the grid view the way you need them to be, and then they're fine. If someone were to drop out and rejoin, again, you can either on a Pearl, if you have access to the admin UI, you can dynamically change your crops and layouts very easily and quickly and apply them without interrupting your stream. Or you can have people, toggle cameras on and off quickly to rearrange the grid view if you need to. So that is definitely a risk. It is something that can and does happen. But once you get your workflow down, it becomes pretty minimal. Let's see. Brandon was asking, is this a Zoom call with the webinar add-on or using Zoom's built-in templates? No, we're not using Zoom webinar. We're just using a regular Zoom call and then feeding the video output from a computer participating in that Zoom call into Pearl, as we mentioned before. Let's see. So
hey, George, here's a view of the actual gallery view feed from the MacBook that we have connected, just for reference for that question there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a question here. I work in independent music. Streaming is becoming the ultimate resource to continue with the music activities. Can you maybe describe an example of a workflow using this technology for musicians? Let's consider every member of the band staying at home. We've mentioned this in previous webinars. That actually might be the final frontier, the ultimate challenge of all of this, because it's easy to do this type of content in web conferencing like Zoom. But those applications are not designed for high quality audio. They're not designed for music. There are ways to make it work, and I've seen all kinds of people building third-party plugins to up the quality and doing all kinds of things. That I think is a bit messy and complicated, but there's some ways to do it. But in general, most conferencing applications, whether it's Skype, Zoom, WebEx, doesn't matter, Google Meet, or any of those, they're designed around the human voice. They're not designed around the wide spectrum of sound that the musical instruments make. So that can be a big challenge. I think no matter what you decide to do, it ultimately starts with using good gear to get the best quality audio into your environment as best you can. So if you are stuck using something like Zoom, make sure you're not just using an open microphone on your laptop, because it's going to sound terrible. I actually spoke to a customer on live chat the other day about this. Turns out they had a Focusrite Scarlett sitting in their closet that they weren't using as an input for their musical instrument. That's an obvious place to start. Start with getting a super high quality XLR in, TRS in, whatever it is that you need. Don't use just an open microphone on your smartphone or on your laptop, because again, they're just not designed for that. So it starts there, and it kind of, gets more complicated if everyone's in their own place, because as Michael Dillon commented in chat, latency is also an issue. Yeah, playing together is extremely difficult. And I think a lot of the highest quality stuff I've seen online is clearly post-produced. It wasn't done live, because it's really difficult. So I honestly don't have a straight answer for you to that question, because that's, like I say, I think is the ultimate final frontier to all of this is music. To make it sound good and sync up is a whole other challenge level.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's...
Sorry, David.
I was going to say, I don't think anyone solved that latency issue well enough for musicians to be in separate locations and actually play together in real time. So that's difficult. But we have seen people using conferencing in parallel with streaming to a CDN, so that at least if you have a single musician or multiple musicians that are going to play in kind of a concert series, one at a time, kind of one after the other, you can switch between them and make sure that the equipment they have is streaming to somewhere outside of your conferencing application. So you're not worried about the conferencing codecs kind of getting in the way of the sound. But yeah, lots of people asking that same question of how do I get two people, in different places to play together at the same time. And I think physics is just getting in the way there. It's
a tough one.
Can't make the speed of light go faster.
Yeah. So here's a great question coming in from Sean O'Hara, and this is specifically for you, James. And I think you have a great answer for this. And it's another one that makes StreamShark unique, in my opinion. The question is, does StreamShark have an on-premise device to stream internally for LAN users as well? We have a saturated multi-gigabit internet connection with 5,000 users going out to the internet to try and watch these streams. And I think you guys have a feature that's not an on-premise thing, but another way of redistributing this.
Yeah, we've definitely tackled it in a different way. Certainly there are on-prem solutions out there, but we've gone for a pure browser-based solution. So we actually have, for our enterprise customers that have that exact situation, a P2P integration that uses WebRTC to actually share within that local network the content, the segments, securely share those segments amongst people that are within the same office or subnet. So, we're a cloud-based solution. Ultimately, at least one or two of the streams are going to come from the cloud, but, you're not having 5,000 people trying to pull down a high-definition live stream or live event from the web. You're just going to have one or two folks pulling that stream down, and then the rest of them can organize automatically and share that content within their network and share those segments amongst all those different viewers. So that both helps with that scalability and avoiding that saturation issue, but it also really actually improves the quality of the stream as well. So more people are going to get a higher quality rendition of that content.
Yeah, and again, that was exactly what I was thinking you were gonna say and answer that question with, because again, it is one of the features that I think is unique with StreamShark. And not a lot of other CDNs offer things like that, because they're not necessarily trying to serve the enterprises who find themselves in those situations. And maybe right now it doesn't matter as much because everyone's at home, so they're just using their home connections. But when we do get back to the offices and you have 5,000 people on a campus all trying to use the internet at the same time, those are real concerns. No matter how big the pipe is, there is a saturation point.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of sort of user-centric metrics as well. I think that's probably the second piece, and maybe it's as valuable, if not more valuable, than the offloading and sharing aspect of that solution. Is there's a deeper level of insight when that solution is used, and where we have enterprise customers that are using single sign-on or identity platforms to integrate and protect their content on StreamShark, we actually get per user metrics. So if your VP of engineering says, I had a bad stream, we can actually look him up individually in the system and actually get per user metrics about, what went wrong, was it his Wi-Fi? Was he on campus? Was he at home? Was he on the bus? Like what was actually the contributing factors to, him having less than optimal stream? So there's, as well as the sharing, there's really fantastic insights that go along with that integration.
Here's another great question, and I think this goes to both of you, and it's a really simple one. Thoughts on SRT versus HLS?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll talk from the ingest side maybe, because I think a lot of people think about HLS from the distribution side, right? So from the streaming server out to the viewer. I'll let James take that piece. Maybe I'll take the contribution side. For us, I think HLS is something we're seeing become popular on the ingest side as people move away from pure RTMP or RTMPS. And I think that will continue to evolve. We've seen SRT really gain a lot of steam in the last little while, and there's definitely some advantages to the way that SRT works, especially on the ingest side, where you have people contributing from that last mile. So where they're not in a studio with perfect internet with a great connection, SRT really does help to improve the video quality that you're going to get on that ingest link over some pretty unreliable kind of internet scenarios. I mean, nothing is magic. There's trade-offs there, but it does a really good job of taking what would be an otherwise pretty unusable contribution link and cleaning it up to the point that it's quite usable. And in fact, often people can't tell that it's a poor link at all. So my thoughts are HLS is here to stay and it's growing, but SRT has certainly got advantages. And I think you're going to see both become popular options for ingest and for output from encoders like ours.
Yeah. So earlier, just before James, you have a crack at that. Earlier, someone had asked the question, saying in chat, they had just made the comment that Epiphan was working on SRT. They heard that somewhere, and they asked about progress. And so progress is that hasn't stopped. We're still working on that, and there will be more information to come in the coming weeks on that. So now I'll hand it over to James to kind of address the thoughts on SRT versus HLS.
Sure. I think David covered most of the points on SRT on the ingest and contribution side. I definitely think it's valuable and plays a role, particularly in high latency situations. So that's really where RTMP can fall over. So you can have a faraway ingest that's well connected, has great bandwidth, but if at a certain point, if the latency is too high, that's where we, in our own personal experience running how many thousands of events, that's where we see it fall over. And I think SRT with its, error correction and large sort of buffer can really tidy up and clean that up. At least for us, we don't see ourselves using SRT for end user delivery. You can certainly do it, but there's obviously a lot of scalability challenges around that. I think we're very much focused on HLS and Dash and really keenly following the evolution and the finalization of the low latency HLS standard. So that's going to be critical for us. And I think as we all try and focus on reducing the glass-to-glass latency, the end-to-end latency, I think that's definitely going to involve, chunked, small HLS, small segment HLS-based contributions. So I'd expect that's the way the wind is blowing, and I think we're going to see more and more end-to-end HLS-based systems to achieve that latency that we all want, that we all kind of lost when RTMP delivery on the end user stopped being a supported and real thing for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. So here's a good question. And I'm going to have to scan through some of these questions. There's still a lot of questions here, guys, but we are running out of time. So I'm going to scan through them after I pose this one to you two. And I'm going to have to filter some of them. So if I don't get to your question, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we're just running out of time. So one of the questions here, similar to one we had previously, what's the typical latency for the remote operator space to the producer, and can the producer control a PTZ camera manually, as an example? And that's an interesting one. And Dave, maybe you can address that from our experience experimenting with that kind of thing.
Yeah, we have been playing quite a bit with that. And I guess the short, simple answer is yes. It is possible for a producer to control a PTZ camera, both in terms of it, just the tilt and zoom, but also other parameters like focus and other things. So it is possible to get in there remotely and control those cameras. Many of the PTZ cameras will have what they call network control. So a lot of it's, Visca or a similar protocol running over IP. That is normally restricted, or at least designed to be within the LAN. So whatever building, whatever kind of office environment or studio environment you're in. But if you can use either a VPN or remote desktop or TeamViewer, any kind of technology that allows you to extend that access to that local area network out to the producer's location, allows them to then take control of those cameras and adjust them. And so we I think at the moment in our studio, we don't have our PTZ set up. We're using other cameras, but certainly it is possible for you to set it up so that the producer can go in there. The one caveat I would say, and it's back to the whole area around latency, is you don't really want to be panning or zooming that camera live. You want to be probably setting up a couple shots for whatever situation you have. Maybe you've got one guest and it's kind of a head and shoulders shot, or you've got two people that are in the same environment that are doing an interview style, and you need a wider shot plus a close shot. So I think, yes, you can control it, but the feedback makes it difficult to be sitting there with kind of a joystick controller and being on a live shot controlling it. I think what's more feasible is to be able to either set those cameras to the shots you want in advance and leave them there and just switch them through the production, or at the very least make sure if you are zooming or changing the pan or tilt of a camera, you do it when it's not live. So switch to a second camera, that becomes your live shot. Then you can go back to the first camera, move it around, get the shot you want, and then cut back. I think trying to do a live zoom or a live pan on a PTZ camera from a remote location is just going to be a very frustrating, difficult experience. At least that's what we've found so far.
Okay. So I do have some other questions in here that I'm going to try and get through very quickly here. One of them was, is there a trial account for StreamShark? So that one's obviously directed to James.
Yeah, you bet. So just go to streamshark.io and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial.
There was another one in here that I thought was interesting from Steven saying, what about multi-audio support of StreamShark and how to transport that? So I'm not totally sure. Are you meaning different audio tracks, Steven, or are you looking at something else there? So that's an interesting one. I do often see questions a lot about trying to set up multiple audio.
Yeah, it might be multiple languages. I think it's on our wish list, put it that way. But this has come up a few times over the years. As that it's definitely the holy grail for certain types of events to have a single player with multi-audio tracks and multi-captions. So
Well,
we definitely do the multi-captions. Not 100% sure on the multi-audio tracks in terms of something that's switchable.
Well, I think, and a big reason why, we haven't seen a whole lot of that in general is because, and one of the reasons people are starting to move away from things like RTMP is limitations in the protocol itself to do some of these things.
Yeah,
Some
it's
of these
hard.
newer protocols have these as options. And so as we move into some of the newer, more sophisticated protocols, things like that become easier for a number of different points.
Sure.
I'm just trying to scan through questions here and grab some of the ones that seem really interesting. I'm going to answer some of them very, very quickly here. Walter was asking, have you integrated SRT with a guest, specifically interactively, so the guest receives SRT and transmits SRT? At the moment, neither Epiphan nor StreamShark, to my understanding, have integrated SRT yet. So can't really say yes or no to that other than, as we look at integrating these technologies down the road, we'll have to see. But I know that, Dave, we're kind of looking at both ingest and output on a Pearl in that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, without going too deep, we don't have a lot of time. I would say in a lab scenario, yes, we have done exactly that. And by a lab scenario, I mean people working in different in their houses over the last few weeks. We've been kind of experimenting with that. It's, as George mentioned, it's not yet in production, but definitely that is something that we have been doing and see as a really great alternative to bring in contribution feeds in the very near future.
I think we're in the same boat. Like we've done a POC in the lab, but it's not yet in the shipping product. And I think we're keen. We want to make sure that the support's there on the contribution side as well. So we obviously work with our partners, and as the capability becomes available, we'll certainly add that in.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to take this last question from Richard. There are still some other ones there, so I'm sorry if I didn't get to answering your questions. I may hang out in chat and try and answer them in text, but we'll probably end the stream portion. So the last one here from Richard is, can you summarize the major advantages of using StreamShark for distributing content compared to a CDN like Crowdcast, which you guys are using for this webcast? So that's a fair question. So I think there, and I'll let James kind of approach it from his side, but from our side, one of the reasons we've chosen Crowdcast for these webinars is the Q&A panel that I've been using and the polling stuff that it has integrated is pretty ultra simple. But if I needed a permanent, enterprise level CDN, CMS, everything together, remote encoder control, all those things, we would have never even considered Crowdcast. It's too simplistic. Literally, when we started doing these webinars 2 months ago, we chose Crowdcast because of its simplicity to integrate things and already had that tool set there. And the first webinar we did, we put it together using Crowdcast in less than 2 days and made all of this work. So we chose it because of its ultra simplicity to get things up and going. But if this was going to be a permanent platform, we would probably be considering something else. So like a StreamShark. So maybe, James, from your perspective, what does StreamShark really have as a big advantage over some of the more simplistic CDNs, even like Crowdcast that has some of these webinar-based tools built in? What do you guys really have that outweighs that?
Yeah, I think there's a few pieces to that we touched on probably earlier in the show, but I think it's the end-to-end nature of the system where we're have control even into the premises or the lab or the event space, where we have that remote and direct interface with the hardware encoding devices, such as the Epiphan Pearl family of devices. So there's that end-to-end control and end-to-end insight that you get from having a single point of contact and a single control plane, where you've got that bird's eye view of everything that's happening in the show flow. And certainly it helps you manage that show flow, helps you plan it out, send the links out, manage the transition as the event goes live, and the post-event phase as well. And I think our heritage is really these kind of mega scale can't fail events. So I think in terms of how the system is architected, it's designed to scale, and there's redundancies built into every single facet of the system, whether it's primary and backup ingest, multi-CDN, multiple transcoding stacks, dual stack DNS. Like, I think, it's essentially a battle tested platform that's, had to deal with some of the largest public and sort of corporate internal events that have gone on in the last 5 to 10 years. So there's a heritage there that's led to the strength and the durability and the reliability of the platform. So we do the white label piece. So if you didn't want a social restream at all, if you wanted to have full control of the experience, embed that on your website, brand it with your corporate branding. We make you look good, basically. We're just in the background and no one actually needs to know that it's us. And that's true for 90% of our customers. It's like, it looks like they're doing it, but in fact, it's actually us doing it in the background. And of course, we have all those social hooks, deep API integrations, and it's not just a fire and forget social integration. There's health metrics coming back to us. There's primaries and backups set up on Facebook and YouTube. There is that chat integration as well, where we become a single clearinghouse for all of the interaction and the chat, both across our white label platform and those social platforms like Facebook and YouTube. So it really is, the sum of all these parts that make it a super powerful platform. And, we don't want to have people needing to go to, with the exception of, we don't make hardware encoders, of course, but we don't want people having to go to other tools to do, to execute their stream and to tick all the boxes that they need to tick. And that's really motivated how we've designed the product.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you everyone for joining us. Of course, if you want to learn more about the Pearl products that we've been talking about today, you can of course check out our website, epiphan.com/products. You can send us an email. So if I didn't get to any of your questions and you want to engage in a deeper level conversation with us on that, send us an email, info@epiphan.com. If you'd like to arrange even a demo of the Pearl and have a conversation more in depth around that, send us an email. We can make those arrangements. And of course, we want to thank James for joining us for today's webinar. It was great having you. And of course, we missed seeing you and your team at NAB this year. It's very sad.
Always a highlight.
Yeah. So, maybe next time we'll, I think we're still fingers crossed for whenever the next event will be, but looking forward to it. And we're looking forward to continuing to see the integrations deepen between Pearl and StreamShark and learning about the more and more interesting ways we keep discovering that our shared customers are leveraging them. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. We do have a ton of webinars coming up. We have a ton of webinars we've already done. And of course, every Thursday at 3 o'clock Eastern time, we always have our Live at Epiphan show where we discuss all kinds of different stuff. And tomorrow's episode, I don't know what day it is anymore. Tomorrow's episode, we're going to be talking about setting up your school for video productions. And so one of the last questions that came in from Jane was asking about, can you use our product for online teaching purposes? So Jane, I would say tune in to tomorrow's Live at Epiphan episode, 3 o'clock Eastern, where we're going to be talking a lot about exactly that. And of course, we do have other webinars in the past talking about online learning based around using the Pearls and things like that. And of course, like I said, reach out to us and we're happy to answer any questions you have. Just send us an email, live chat on our website, give us a call, whatever you need. We can help out as best we can. I'm going to ask Cameron to leave our outro slide running for a little bit so that I can try to answer a couple of these remaining questions text-based. But I want to thank once again James for joining us. Thank you, Dave, for joining us as well. Thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next time.